Hey, boils and ghouls, and welcome to day 9 of the 13 days of Halloween with Cyanide and Hemlock. There's only 4 more days left till Halloween. Are you excited? Today, we'll be diving into one of the most popular urban legends that has been around for decades, maybe even centuries. If you're a girl, or boy, or anything in between, of the 90s or even the early 2000s, you'll know exactly what legend this is. You're in the bathroom of your best friend's house with the lights off, a candle lit and held up to your face, and the other girls or boys or anyone in between waiting patiently outside of the door to see if she'll visit you tonight. You work up the courage and whisper that name 3 times. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. To most of us, this is simply a legend, a tale told by girls, boys, and everyone in between, all huddled in a bathroom or a bedroom on a Friday night. But like all other legends that seem to float around, this has some truth to it. There are many different potential origins for the story of Bloody Mary, but today we're going to focus on the 3 that caught my eye in my research, and the 3 that seem to be the most obvious. The 3 women who seem to make up the lore behind this seemingly innocent legend are Queen Mary I, Elizabeth Bathory, and Mary Queen of Scots. All 3 women have a dark past that seem to play into this urban legend. Let's get started. Queen Mary I, also known as Mary Tudor, is where we'll begin with the truth behind an urban legend. Mary, the only child of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, was the first regnant queen of England. Mary had a problem with her femininity at a rather young age, around 17, when King Henry had annulled his marriage to Catherine due to the fact she couldn't provide a male heir to the throne. This annulment led to Mary being unable to see her mother then or ever again. King Henry went on to marry his ex-wife's maid of honor, Anne Boleyn, who pressed to the Parliament to declare Mary illegitimate and succeeded. Later on, we will all know that Anne was beheaded by her husband for treason, but by this time, Mary had a lot of hate and abandonment in her life. Through all of her unfortunate, miserable menstrual cycles and her growing issues, she finally took the throne at age 37. Mary would promptly be wed to Philip of Spain, someone 10 years younger than her. 2 short months into their marriage, Mary announced she was pregnant. The times were different, however, with no pregnancy test and no doctor allowed to examine royalty. So it was never really confirmed back then if you were pregnant until you had the child. Mary's stomach grew, along with every other pregnancy symptom. Throughout the next couple of months, in royal tradition, Mary went into her chamber 6 months before childbirth to deliver the new child. But when Mary's due date arrived, there was no child to be seen. Doctors believed that they had given the wrong due date, and Mary extended her stay in her chamber. Those months came and went, and she was still without child. The rumors began to spread throughout the land that Queen Mary had delivered a boy, or another rumor that she had died during childbirth. None of this was true, however. Mary had experienced a phantom pregnancy. And if you're not sure what a phantom pregnancy is, your body wants a child so badly that it gives you every symptom of a pregnancy, even the growing belly. And once you've reached your quote-unquote due date, the belly and all of your symptoms seem to go away. Mary wanted a child so badly that her body followed through with every part of a real pregnancy, except the actual birth. During her pregnancy, however, things in her country began to fall apart. Her people had been divided into two religious groups, the Protestants and the Catholics. Mary's determination and love for Catholicism is where her infamous name, Bloody Mary, came into play for her. Shortly before Christmas of 1554, Mary signed an act that would lead to the persecution of around 280 Protestant men and women, leading her to be branded by the namesake Bloody Mary. Sadly, these innocent men and women were burned at the stake by Queen Mary, but it was all in vain. After Queen Mary's death, the country turned back to Protestantism. With some versions of the legend of Bloody Mary, it is said that you chant the words, "I stole your baby," to taunt her into appearing. This is said to be because of the two phantom pregnancies that Queen Mary had experienced in her lifetime and her determination to have a child. Even though the namesake was given to Queen Mary in the time of her ruling, there are still two other women in history who lend to the lore of Bloody Mary. Our next ruler is Mary, Queen of Scots. Unlike with Queen Mary, we will be skipping over her earlier life and heading directly into her reign and later life, where her possible connection to the namesake Bloody Mary happens. Her first of two unsuccessful marriages would be to her cousin, Henry Stuart, the Earl of Darwin. Stuart, along with a group of Protestant nobles, had approached Mary's Catholic secretary and stabbed him 56 times in front of her while she was pregnant with his child. Ironically, not long after this horrendous attack, Stuart met his own demise and was murdered in February of 1567, leaving Mary to be a widow. Mary was accused of having part in his murder, however, because of her horrible timing of wedding one of the main suspects, James Hepburn. Unfortunate for Mary, this marriage to Hepburn would be worse than her marriage to Stuart. Hepburn abducted Mary and held her prisoner in Dunbar Castle. Hepburn's reasoning for essentially kidnapping the queen was so he could lay his claim to kingship, which was later denied. He was arrested, and the reign was given to Mary's infant son, James. With all of Mary's unfortunate luck, she decided to flee to the south to seek sanctuary with her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. And as you can guess, Mary didn't have the best of luck, and her own cousin had her imprisoned for 18 years. The Catholics of the time now had someone to rally around if Queen Elizabeth I, the Protestant, met her demise. And in 1586, letters laying out a way to overthrow Elizabeth were found in Mary's chamber. This obviously led to her being arrested for treason and sentenced to death. On February 8th, 1586, Queen Mary of Scots would be beheaded, but not before she was led to her death. Jolly. Mary is said to have even made a joke about never having grooms disrobe her in public before. Clearly, this woman was a little on the crazy side. But her executioner botched his first attempt at beheading her, and instead, the axe dug into the back of her head. Even his second attempt was a fail, leading him to having to saw off her head. After his success finally came, he held her head in his hands and yelled, "God save the Queen." This gruesome end for Mary is where people assume she got the name Bloody Mary. A little more graphic than our first tale, but definitely not as graphic as our last. Our last wonderful ruler, who is said to have some truth behind the Bloody Mary legend, is probably one of the most infamous female serial killers of all time, Elizabeth Bathory. I personally find her story to be the most fascinating because of the reign of blood she had throughout her years as ruler. In 1604, when Elizabeth's husband had died, there was a 6-year span of killings in the village where Elizabeth's gifted castle was, and beyond. After Bathory had run out of young women in her village, she began to seek out wealthy daughters of aristocrats to instruct in the art of etiquettes. This was obviously only a trick to lure the young girls into Bathory's chambers to be slaughtered. Bathory's killings are probably one of the most brutal scenes in history done by a woman, or a man of that case. In a later investigation done by concerned aristocrats, showed just how gruesome the scenes would be. Some women were scalded with white hot tongs before being dunked into freezing cold water. Some women were covered in honey and slowly devoured by ants. Others were burned, mutilated, and even cannibalized. And the lucky ones were simply beaten to death. The story goes that Bathory had been killing these young women to preserve her own youth with their blood. Legend says that Elizabeth would bathe in the blood of her victims, but we aren't sure if that is actually true or not. On December 30th, 1610, Bathory was finally arrested for her crimes against over 300 girls. Bathory would be walled up in her own castle, a windowless cell, for her punishment. 4 short years later, Bathory would die in her solitary confinement, and her legend would live on. While we can see that her name wasn't in fact Mary, she does hold the name Blood Countess because of her crimes. She is also the inspiration for many other stories that float around the centuries. But those are just our 3 contenders for the truth behind the Bloody Mary urban legend. What do you think? Who do you think this legend is modeled after? And will you try this spooky sleepover trick now that you know the truth behind our urban legend? This unfortunately brings day 9 of the 13 days of Halloween with Cyanide and Hemlock to a close. We hope you enjoyed a little snippet of truth behind one of the most infamous urban legends. If you liked this video, be sure to give us a like and subscribe and become a part of the Haunted Ghoul Society, which we now have a Facebook group for. You can interact with us and other wonderfully spooky ghouls throughout the year. We'll leave that link in the description down below for you if you'd like to join. That's all for me today. So remember, stay spooky.